you have a memory of what we're doing. All right, hello everybody again. I'm Denise Hyde, community builder with the Email Tournament. It's so great to see all of your faces. I so look forward to this time every Friday. It's awesome. But I'm not going to be facilitating today, so I'm going to put myself on mute, and Jill Vitale Awesome is going to be facilitating our conversation today, and we're going to have fun. Lots of good questions.
Well, hello everyone. Denise is definitely a hard act to follow, so I will do my best to channel her facilitation skills. But I hope that Denise will jump in when needed, and everyone else. So welcome everyone, thanks for coming today. We have a special topic for today, and that was brought to us by a couple of the architecture firms that we work with and partner with. So we have Kephart Architects with us today, and Kephart is a firm here in Denver that I've been really lucky to have worked with, and we do a lot of kind of getting together and brainstorming the future and ideas about how we can do better in our field. So we have, I think I saw John Binder here, and Len Siegel's here. And I don't know if Haley is on as well from the team. I think she was planning to join. And then
on.
You're here too, Haley?
This is Haley, yeah.
Awesome, thanks for being here. And we have Rob Simonetti from SWBR, and a lot of people in our Eden Alternative world know Rob and SWBR. They've done a ton of work on the small home design for nursing homes and greenhouse design. And so Rob, thank you for being here with us today. So, and I do want to point out, so SWBR and Kephart, one of the things that we've been working on as a team with the Eden Alternative is we had all these great sponsors and exhibitors for our conference. And we all know what happened to our conference. It did not happen. And so we've been working with different sponsors and exhibitors on how else they wanted to support our work and be able to connect with people. And so this is one of the ways we're doing that. And so I really want to thank them and all the other folks that continue to work with us, because without them, we wouldn't be able to keep doing the work we're doing. So big thank you to all of them. So I don't know how many of you have spent time really talking to architects, but it is one of my favorite things. When I was working on my book, I wrote a whole chapter on how do you design spaces. And one of my favorite things was interviewing architects because of just the way that, especially the people that we know, the big forward thinkers, the way they think about the world. And we all know that we've seen organizations, right, where they want to change things, so they build a new building and they don't change any of the operations or the culture, and nothing happens. It's just a prettier institution. And one of the architects I talked with explained to me that, and I think I mentioned this on another call, but it just fascinated me that the building is the hardware and the operations and the culture is the software. And when you have both, that's when real change starts to happen. And so it's really important. What we're talking about today isn't just you build a new building and it'll fix everything. We all know that doesn't happen. But the design of a space has a major impact on us. Winston Churchill said that we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. And they shape our behavior and the way we feel about things, and what we do, whether we wash our hands or not, is based on whether there are sinks that are visible to people. There's been really interesting studies that, if you're, and this is actually something we should all think about in meetings, is if you're with a group of people and you're in a room with like really high ceilings, people will think it really in an abstract way, kind of more vision kind of things. But if you're in a room with really low ceilings, people are much more focused on details. And so it's really kind of interesting how the design of our spaces change the way we think. They change whether we are willing to and feel comfortable interacting with other people, or if we stay to ourselves. It's so big and it's so important. And I don't think we spend enough time really talking about that. At this time, it also impacts how we are able to practice infection control, right? It impacts how are people, especially in this time, how do we practice infection control and also support our need for connecting with other people, for purpose, for all these things. So we are, that's why we got everybody together today, is SWBR and Kephart are both really interested in how they can support this field. Okay, so what can they be doing right now to help things be better for communities that are supporting elders and their team members, and what can be done differently in the future? So are y'all ready to have a little discussion about this? All right, cool. Thank you so much for doing this. And thank you again. You know, sometimes spaces get built and we don't talk to the people that work and live in them. And I know that architects are always pushing for that to happen, but it doesn't always happen. So this is a really great chance for these folks to hear directly from all of you. And I encourage, you know, Len, John, Rob, Haley, if you want to jump in with comments or ask clarifying questions, let's do that. So the first question that we wanted to pose to you is just to really think about, given the current physical layout of your communities, and I know some of you are in senior living, which might have independent assisted living, some are working mainly in nursing homes, but what improvements would be helpful right now during this crisis? So you could think about it now, what's right now, or what can you imagine needing even after a vaccine or some sort of treatment has successfully stopped the spread. So think about residential areas, entry, dining areas, visitor spaces, hallways, staff spaces. Let's get some stuff out there and talk about this. So you can unmute yourself and talk. And Jack says, since it's about architecture, I thought I should move myself virtually to a room I would like to be in. Oh, Jack, I like your background. That's lovely. So let's start talking about this. And I'm going to go through some of these comments. So Pascal says, facilities should have lots of internal windows without being invasive, so staff don't have to enter the room of contagious patients every time for gowning, ungowning, losing precious time. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I worked in hospital administration for a few years in various settings, but I started in hospital administration when at the time of the AIDS epidemic. So that's really reminiscent of the situation at the time, although it's a completely different animal. But what is happening when you have contagious patients, residents, is that when the staff need to go in there to just visit, make sure they're okay, they end up having to gown up, ungown, which not only takes time, but also prevent them from getting to all of the patients or all the residents. So a design which would allow maybe windows to be hidden when not needed and open when needed, with a way to communicate with people inside so we can check on them, I think would be very effective in containing the spread of any infectious disease.
Thank you. You know, that also brings to mind, you know, a lot of these things we're talking about with infection control also make sense for other things. And when you just mentioned that, I was thinking about, I was visiting a community in Australia that the elders there played a very critical role in the design of this space. It was a small home model for individuals living with dementia. And the residents there said, we would like windows into the hallway. Well, so they could see out too. They also wanted wide doorways, but also that the team members weren't coming in at night and waking them up. So they had blinds so they could be closed for privacy, but they really preferred that rather than somebody knocking and coming in, that somebody could just peek in and make sure everything was okay. So that's thank you. That's great. Jenny, talk about outdoor space, would you?
Hey, so I just was saying I really appreciate my community is, each neighborhood is designed around an outdoor courtyard so that people have access all of the time. But surrounding that are a lot of windows. And so especially for memory care, like being able to see that they're out there enjoying themselves, but you know, just being able to do that spot check, like, does somebody need sunscreen? Do I need to put up the umbrella? Like, what's going on? I really appreciate that. Not to mention all the natural light that it provides inside as well.
Thank you, Jenny. That's awesome. And you know, so every time everybody's saying something, I'm like, there's all these connections because there's all the research that's been done on, the health of people if they can see, if they can see the outdoors, and how it impacts. I think it was done in a hospital, and they found much quicker recovery when people could even just see nature. So that's awesome. And also, right, we've heard this from multiple communities, if the team members can't see the outdoors, they're much less likely to support the residents in getting outside. So people end up stuck inside. If it's really hard to get to a space to be outside and the staff can't see, then people don't get outside as much. So that's a really, really good point. I want to go back up to Len asked a question. Where do you draw the line between transparency to the resident units and concern about privacy? So that goes back to that window question. Does anybody have comment on that or thoughts? Neil Ann, are you wanting to say something? You are muted. Let me see if we can unmute you. Oh, let's see. Oh, there you go.
Good. Listen, I'm a little late. I wanted to talk about the courtyard. I'm grateful to be in a place where the door for the one side is to the courtyard and the other is to the hallway. And when it's especially beautiful is when we cannot have community dining, but we can opt, those of us who are able to feed ourselves, can go out into the courtyard, keeping 6 feet apart. But it's such a lift just to know that that time of the day, it's not going to be confined inside the room. And maybe that's just so obvious, but when people architect or design, do as much as possible to make it so that there is room for residents to get out when they're able, and when they aren't, to have a caregiver or occupational therapist, someone to go with them. Like here, they take them outside the building and go around the parking lot and see the rose bushes and things like that. But I just want to applaud whoever designed Piners. Really were thinking of the care like that. So anyway, kudos to everybody that's thinking about environment here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil Ann. Yeah, that opportunity to, my parents live in a community, and they said they're the only thing that's saving them right now is that they have a balcony and they can get out for a walk. And if it wasn't for that, my mom said, I don't know how we would get through this. Nature's so important. And maybe, so start, did you design the building where Neil Ann lives? If you...
No, my in-laws, my mother-in-law and father-in-law dreamed, because they started working in an old Victorian home, which if I were in the environment, I could take you to an oil painting that a friend of the family did of the old Victorian home. But that's how Piners started. And my husband lived upstairs in that old Victorian home. The kitchen was up there. They did the meal prep and everything. He still can go up and down stairs like no one else I've ever known, because he spent his whole childhood taking food up and down those stairs to the people in the dining room on the lower floor. So they started that way, and then they decided they wanted to build and expand. And so they built the nursing home, and whoever the architect was, I don't know who that was, but whoever they were, they really thought about having the feeling of the outside coming in, because we have these huge sliding glass doors with a huge window in every single room. Now, our rooms are 1960s size, so they're just barely big enough. I wish they were a little larger, but it is what we have to work with. So that one part of our design, I wouldn't trade for anything.
So that's the original design from the, is it in the 60s? They had the big windows?
60s.
Awesome.
Yes. Yes.
And so somebody asked about, I think it was Mary Miller, is there a source for, for the research about the ability to see nature speeds recovery? And that, I know it's out there online, but this is a great book called Therapeutic Landscapes, and it's by Claire Cooper Marcus and Naomi Sachs. And there is a lot of research in here about the importance of nature. And then I can also try to find that study online, but I know that's where I got a lot of stuff, is from this book. It's really good. Okay. Love the windows in our home. John Binder has a question. Jill, you mentioned blinds for privacy. Is that something that would give the resident privacy or be too much trouble to use? Does anybody have that design in their building where they have windows to the hallway from? Okay, I know at the place where I was in Australia, it was just a simple blinds they pulled over. And then the resident opened them when they wanted it. And it also provides for some more light from the hallway too, which can be nice. And in this building, it was all the rooms, and then there were the windows to the hallway, and right on the other side of the hallway were windows to the courtyard. So they were getting natural light from both directions. Another thing that we've seen is having, I think they're called Juliet Balconies, where it's like a sliding door, so you can feel like you're outside. And I don't know if any of the architects who are here want to talk about that, with that connection to nature, how those can work. John or Len?
Sure, I'll jump in there. Juliet Balconies, right? So Juliets are basically like the romantic Romeo and Juliet, where there's, imagine Juliet is leaning out her big window and able to talk to Romeo down below. Well, in this particular case, you can have a sliding door or couple doors that open like French doors. And then there's a little railing in front of you, so of course you're not going to fall out. But then you have this sense that there's this whole doorway that opens out to the outdoors without it really being a balcony, but it almost feels like your living room then becomes a balcony because you have this wide open feeling to the outdoors. So that's a Juliet. It's a lot less expensive than a full balcony that projects out from a building. So that's the idea of getting a sense of being outside, but still kind of in the comfort of your apartment or your unit.
Awesome, thank you, Len. Let's see, and I know Kyria, you had a comment about something Jennifer Carson had said.
Yeah, well, just thinking about this time and the spaces we're already in, I thought it was a pretty elegant solution of we're needing a space to quarantine that is really contained and separate for communities that are open to beginning the journey towards desegregation. It's a really great time to turn memory care units into quarantine units for COVID patients.
Yeah, segregating people when you kind of have to segregate people, right?
Exactly.
Temporarily.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's already built. It was weird. We were just chatting, and she was like, "Yeah, they're already built for all the things that we need for quarantine and to keep people separate." In this context, to actually really help save lives, and all the research and stuff is out there too. That when we have communities that are desegregated, it's better for everybody.
Awesome. So are there other things that you all, one of the things that occurred to me is in just knowing what's going on right now and knowing that this won't last forever, but, when I don't know if you caught the show we did with Bob Kramer on Monday, but he was talking about whether infection control is at the level it's at, that people are going to be thinking that way. Right. And we need to prepare for something like this happening in the future, and that potential customers, potential residents, family members are going to be thinking about this for a long, long, long time and looking for things that indicate that a community is prepared for this. And one of the things I was thinking about is, in the communities when I used to work with developers building communities, one of the things that always would get cut out is adequate staff space and room for lockers. Okay. And one of the things that occurred to me is, gosh, well, now most communities have this practice where you wear your street clothes to work and you change when you get there to prevent that spread of, you're on a bus going to work and you're bringing in potential, germs on your uniform. But a lot of places don't even have enough space for employees to change and keep their things. So are there things like that, or design features that you think should be in place to easily to deal with this right now? Are there things you wish you had?
There's nothing we wish we had that we don't have. I got a nice break room now.
Oh, is that Gail talking?
Oh, I thought I was muted. I'm sorry.
You're not muted.
Gail?
Hi, let's hear what you all are saying. It sounds interesting.
Well, we were just saying, Sandy just made the observation it would be nice if we had a bigger break room, but that's okay. We're still working on the sanctuary that we talked about outside because the weather's nice. So we're waiting for that. I think that's already been, Linda already ordered that for us, the gazebo. We're gonna have a gazebo, have music out there, and so on and so forth. So that's all good news. Today you'll have to forgive us. We're testing everybody in the building. All of us have been tested today, and we're still testing residents. So that's why we're a little late jumping on the call today.
Well, we're glad you're here. Thanks for being with us. And thanks for sharing that. And maybe I think one of the things that's come up in prior calls is how much we're listening to, and I know all of the people in the Eden world honor team members, but I think it's becoming even more apparent that we need to do that. And so creating, and what you just said, Gail, about having a sanctuary space, a space where team members can go, it's not just important right now, right? And having a little brick break room where you go and sit and there's no windows is probably not the best way to show our team members that we honor them.
Absolutely. Very true.
Yeah.
So we're excited about that.
Yeah, and access to the outdoors. There are hospitals that have, they've created spaces for team members outside, because we that work in a community also need those restorative,
yes.
The restorative things of nature, like the people that live in our communities.
That's so true, and the sun's so healing. And we already do have an area outside, but we're just going to fine tune it a little bit. A couple of different ones, actually. And of course, our residents as well, especially during this time, we've always been big on the outdoors and the healing powers of the sun, but we're doing most of our activities outside right now, which is really great. I think it's one of the things that's kept our residents from becoming depressed.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm trying to see. So Abby said I attended a presentation by a photographer who had head injury. Oh, Abby, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so this woman was in a major car accident. She's from Toronto. I believe she was a photographer. I mean, I saw her many years ago. And she was so depressed and demoralized in this horrible hospital room. And then she just had the idea to get her photos and other artwork just plastering her room. And so she then, she eventually rehabbed. She, got back to a healthy life. And she started presenting on this. She's fascinating. And I bought 2 of her DVDs, and they're amazing for that sense of calm, nature, solitude, healing. Beautiful. Leslie Bridger is her name. I can't believe it.
Awesome.
I mean, I saw her probably 25 years ago.
Perfect. Perfect. So for people who are just joining, I think Auntie just got here. We're talking about what kinds of things, what kinds of building improvements would be helpful to you during this time. What do you wish you had in your community for infection control or well-being at this time? We talked a lot about nature and the connection to nature already. And how could we build a building better in the future to acknowledge the fact that, whether this virus continues to plague us for many years or not, people are going to be thinking about these things and the possibility of it happening again. So what other thoughts do people have?
So Jill, we have Beth Sanders, I think, is that Berry Bear from Life Bio with us today.
Oh, hey, Beth. Oh, let me see.
You had something in the chat box. I just didn't know if you wanted to mention what you thought.
Yeah, Beth, talk about that. I didn't see that.
Well, Jenny brought it up first about people walking into the plants. And maybe some of you may know that I dress up like a bear and I visit outside the windows of nursing homes lately. And I have been concerned about the plants I'm walking on, obviously. So, yeah, and I did not encounter rose bushes, but it has to be a challenge, different places, as you're visiting outside windows. And I would think that some people I would think that now, and I wouldn't have before, that if my mother, who lives at home right now, but if she was going to be in a community, I would want a first floor room, just in case. Who would have ever thought that really mattered till now? So
that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Mm-hmm.
And Pascal said, could large dining rooms be equipped with movable or removable partitions so that they can be made smaller when needed? But also, that's the other thing. I was reading some things of, we're going to build all small spaces, but how do you create spaces that can be used when you do need to have smaller groups and expand it when people can get together? That's a really good point. What else? Let's see what other things we have.
Jack had some really good stuff that he wrote. I'm
not as good as you. Thank you, Denise, because I'm having a hard time keeping up with the comments. Do you want to call those out?
Well, I can. I wrote a long thing, and I won't repeat it here. It's in the chat. I don't blame you for not being able to conduct the meeting and read the comments all at the same time. But I do notice that we haven't really heard from the architect on the call so far. So I was trying to think about that. Most of the comments come from the perspective of people who work in senior living and would like their workspace done so that their interaction with the residents they're caring for is a little different. So I was moving beyond that to the larger sense of architecture. Architecture is unique in combining engineering considerations and artistic considerations and financial considerations. I remember people always criticized Skidmore, Owings, Merrill because they just produced the most square feet for the least money. That was their model, and they built a pretty big practice on that. So building an architecture practice is not always as simple as being as creative as Frank Lloyd Wright was. So the thing that I heard yesterday was that the latest thinking is to have the four walls melt away and to bring people back into harmony with nature, which is why I put up a background here of a lake where I used to have a cottage in New Jersey. I have a lot of fondness for that. So I think that all of these living things, if you think of it from the point of view of the person entering the building should be welcoming, and that feeling of welcome and warmth should continue throughout the experience. So that not only involves this balancing of artistry and engineering considerations, but it also involves balancing of the traditional with modern technology. For a while, architects became fond of building buildings that looked like they were just made out of concrete blocks. And I remember how wonderful it was in my childhood. We had a basement that was all just these austere concrete blocks. It was just a cold, unwelcoming space. And we put up paneling in it. To have a paneled recreation room was a big deal. So I was sort of appalled when the architecture moved toward engineering so strongly that they thought that a building built of concrete blocks was something that people might really want to live in. So I'd love to hear from some of the architects. I did put in there my own pet peeve, because when you go shopping, if you're looking for independent living type thing, so this doesn't apply for most of the people on this call, but when you're shopping, one of the things they show you is floor plans. So when my wife and I were shopping for a place to live, if there weren't two sinks in the master bathroom, which you can see right away on the floor plan, we just didn't even consider the place, because that's essential to our keeping our marital harmony going well. You know, we each have our needs, and it doesn't really cost much to put an extra sink in. But I talked to the architects about this once at a leading age meeting, and they said, well, that's usually knocked out by the providers right at the get-go because they don't want to spend the money. So this whole area of architecture, you've opened up a very important subject, because you mentioned that quote from Churchill. The space that we live and work in shapes our imagination and thinking. High ceilings, large spaces. The beauty of that library I shared earlier was not only that it's traditional, but it was so large, it just seemed like, wouldn't this be a wonderful space to live in? So I think it's deep. I'd love to hear from the architects if any of them are on the call.
Yeah, that would be great. We do have a few more questions when our architects that are with us are done talking.
Sure.
So yeah, we'd love that. Thanks, Jack.
So one
Yeah, thanks.
One of the
Thank you
things
for your
Jack brought up-
comments.
Go ahead, Denise.
I was going to say, one of the things that Jack brought up that was really interesting to me is I toured a home when I was over in Japan, and it was built and designed with the idea that as a person's abilities changed, things could be rearranged, especially the bathroom. The toilet could be moved to another position in the bathroom so that the person, if it right or left sided paralysis or whatever was happening, they could still manipulate through their space, because things could be moved around to fit the left-hander versus the right-hander kind of stuff. And it's like, I wonder if we think about that. I don't know enough about architecture to know whether that's built into the planning, but it's kind of interesting. Can we, the space be constantly adapted to keep the person comfortable in the room and using it?
Yeah, and I did. So when Denise just said it, it made me think of something else Jack said, and I do want to just point this out. So one of the things when you think about how our architecture and physical surroundings impact the way we behave, one of the things we'll have to be really careful about is that and Denise made this comment in the chat box, that how do you have infection control things that aren't so obviously clinical, because right, if we work in a clinical building, we're going to act like we're all about the clinical world, right? We're not going to act like we're in someone's home. So that's an interesting kind of thing just to keep in mind as we're thinking about all these things is how do you make these things available, but not have it be blatantly institutional and clinical? I don't know. Anyway, I don't know who was going to speak, if it was Len or John. Or
Rob's unmuted.
Rob.
Yeah, this is Rob. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think Jack mentioned many, interesting points, namely balance. And as architects, we're charged with protecting building occupants' health, safety, and welfare. And I think for the last 20 years, with the culture change movement, we've been focused on the health and the welfare, the well-being and everything that Eden stands for, the greenhouse model. And I'm concerned that coming out of COVID, we'll get back to being overly concerned about safety, and we'll start doing things to the physical environment for the sake of safety of this, this pandemic, which is extremely important. Totally get it. But we don't want to slip back and start doing things that start to take away from dignity and autonomy that we've been working on for the last 20 years. So I think we need to look at all of our building moves as temporary. Right now we got to do these things that we need to do. Let's do them well. And then to Jill's point, how do we make some of these things for infection control disappear? We should think of it like universal design. We want to have every home and every space we walk into able to accommodate us throughout our whole life. And now we have to fold in infection control, and we want to be able to do these things without seeing a sneeze guard and without seeing a piece of plastic between the caregiver and the resident, or some of the other moves we might have to see in the near term. But in the long term, we don't want to see those. And so that'll be our job as architects to work with you all and be creative and address all these concerns and fold them into a home, as we have been doing for the last really 20 years with the small house and household model movement.
Thank you so much, Rob. And there are things that are so aligned with everything we talk about and are good for infection control that hopefully, right? So private rooms for people living in nursing homes, private bathrooms, small neighborhoods. Those are good for life and well-being as well as infection control, as long as you have the software to match the hardware, and have consistent staffing and things like that. But yeah, but the other things, we're going to have to be careful about that, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we'll start to see, new regulations written, right? Regulations come out of, issues like this we've seen in the past. But we can, and you all can, get involved in writing the regulations. There are opportunities to engage in writing of NFPA 101 and the International Building Code and the FGA guidelines, and those things are sort of ongoing. So it's really important that designers, architects, and providers get involved in those, and we can actually help write the language of the codes and the regulations, building codes at least, to help shape the environments to for the future, and make sure we again don't strive for excess safety.
The question is really the balance, right? Is what you've been mentioning, and to leave it to the regulator as opposed to the creative type, I think is dangerous. And what we need to have is an environment which is normally open, that can be progressively restricted based on the needs. Now, the COVID epidemic is certainly unusual, but every year we have, tons of people who die because of, flu epidemics in the nursing home. So it's just this one is bigger and it's being more noticed, but that's a problem that needs to be addressed regardless of coronavirus, because it's just one of the multiple infections that can circulate in the nursing homes. So, so I really think, people need to put their brains together and look at how can we build something that's open for, like the mental health and the light and the sounds and the smells, but that can be, quickly modified to restrict movement as needed, or to have like smaller groups while preserving the ability to observe from a central point.
I think you nailed it right there. And, you know, yeah, like you had put in the chat box that every year there's a crisis with influenza. And even though norovirus isn't as deadly, it is something else when you have a norovirus outbreak in your building. And that happens regularly too. So that's a really good point.
I had a thought to share.
Please.
All right. This was both in response to what Rob was talking about, how we may be responding to the crisis we're in now that might change the architecture. And I appreciate the comment that Jack was making about the balance between of what you're spending on the building and what you can afford. You know, I'm thinking, you know, a response when we're looking for infection controls to widen the hallways. The hallways, maybe if they're 8 feet wide, maybe they go to 10 or 12 so we could pass safely, but yet there's an expense to that. So to justify the expense, do we make the corridor more than a place just to go someplace? I mean, one of my pet peeves is corridors, how institutional they are. It's like people don't gather in the hallways, and maybe you don't want to, maybe the fire marshal doesn't want furniture out there. But if we're to rethink the corridor so it becomes a place that maybe it's, you know, when we talk about putting windows, does the window become almost like part of the front porch? Now, I was listening to one executive director talking about, gosh, we have all our residents playing hallway bingo. I go, what's hallway bingo? And she said, well, they're all standing in their doorways and we're calling out bingo numbers. So a thought we had was, gosh, do we make the hallway feel more like an avenue or, you know, front porches where people can actually feel like it's more their space and still be within a zone that they're separated from the neighbors, but yet it feels like an amenity that then becomes justified if we do widen them because we're responding to infection, not let it just be a carryover of a wide hallway, but a place where people can connect and yet be separate.
John, that's awesome. I love that. And you know, it makes me think about one of the architects I talked to was talking about how, and there's this whole concept that if you don't have privacy, you won't have community, because people need to have a place to retreat and be on their own, and that you need to have degrees of privacy. So maybe my apartment or my home is my most intimate space, and then a front porch kind of place is where you're sort of out with people so you can watch what's going on, but you also have a little sense of privacy. So it's that difference between, like, if your bedroom right now opened to a mall, you would never go out because it would be like, whoa. So you have to have those transition spaces, and maybe that front porch idea is sort of that. I don't really want to be out there, but I don't really want to be all alone. So that could meet many different purposes. That's cool. Anybody, what thoughts on, like, your front stoop, Chris Angevine said? Angie, do you want to talk about what you're doing at Signature with how you're engaging people in their doorways?
Hey there, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Hi. So, I mean, yeah, I think much like everyone else, that we have neighborhoods like a lot of people, and we're just trying to maintain that community on the neighborhood to help facilitate, you know, some engagement. So I know they do a lot of dancing, they do a lot of exercising if people want to engage in physical activity as a group, but we still need to maintain social distancing. So that's worked out really well. One of our communities does a theater thing, and so they've brought, all of the elders have they've helped bring their recliners or their chairs to the doorway, and they're projecting a movie at the end of the neighborhood on a wall, and so everybody's kind of look that way so they can have a movie together as a community. versus being in your room and just dialing into your TV. You know, people still want to maintain that human connection. So we're just trying to facilitate those. We did some company-wide concerts. We did one last Friday where people tuned in across the organization, and just, you know, maintaining organization-wide community is really, really important for large organizations too. It's really important on all levels that people just know that it's okay to take a break, right? Let's take a break. Let's take a break from the COVID today and dial into some folk music. And, you know, it was really great, and it was much needed by our elders and our stakeholders. So we've done a lot of those things.
That's awesome. Thank you, Angie. You guys have so many creative things going on in your organization. So we have 15 minutes left, and there are some other really great comments and questions in the chat box, but I wanted to make sure, you know, John, Lynn, Rob, if there was one question you wanted to put out there to this group right now, what would it be? To make sure we have time to get your questions answered.
I think my question would be, what would you like architects to help you with right now? I mean, what is it that we could be doing right now? Because we know, you know, you can plan for the future, but right now you're in the midst of this battle, and we want to know what we could do. And we have skills to do, to think about how people use spaces, and maybe kind of help you brainstorm about shifting spaces around to make them more effective for you. But just like, what can we do to help you get through this? Because it may be with us a lot longer than the media is portraying it to be. It might be with us for a couple of years. So what can we do now to help? That's what I would like to know.
Anybody thoughts on that?
Hi, Jill, this is Linda. I do have a question. We are looking at getting visitors back into our community and what that looks like. And truthfully, it's scary, but it's needed. So we were thinking of doing external visits and what that would look like. We did have one picture come in with kind of this box that is all like glassed in, so you could have some seats on one side, so it's kind of, it is outside, it would be safe. Truthfully, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I still like that. It's just, you know, it's is this, you know, just overkill. So I would love your thoughts on what could be constructed for safe visitation outdoors. So for family members to actually be able to see their loved one safely.
That's a great idea. The one thing that occurred to me is that the architectural profession could work within its trade associations to try to make sure that the response to the crisis is not reactive, but proactive, so that we don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. And one of the things that we haven't talked about here is how the air conditioning, the HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, can be restructured to help with this infection control. The trend in HVAC has been toward individualization, having more thermostats around and trying to adjust to whether the room is occupied or not. And if we move to have some of that include also negative pressure so that there's infection control, then that might be something that the Architectural Association could proactively press for, that would keep the regulators from going off the deep end and giving us something none of us would want.
That's a great point, Jack. And Rob, I think you talked about, you know, having influence on these new regulations, and I don't know that a lot of people in that work in communities know how to get that done. Like, you know what I mean? How do you impact life safety code? How do you, those kinds of things. So I don't know if there are resources or ideas on that.
Yeah, we could, if anyone wanted to reach out to me, or I could, our organization, SAGE, Society for the Advancement of Gerontological Environments, mouthful there. But our members are very involved. All of the regulations are really rolling, you know, non-FPA updates every 3 years, but as soon as they print, they start the next iteration and start taking comments. So I've worked with them through Pioneer Network. And again, a number of our members are active through SAGE. So through them, if anyone's interested, I can get you information on sort of the cycles and when those happen and how to get involved. And you can really get involved all the way to the point of, and I have in the past, of actually writing code regulations, writing regulations about the width of the corridor in a skilled nursing environment. So yeah, it gets pretty fine grained. Got to stick with it, but it's very satisfying to see, you know, codes change for the better based on your experiences and the experience of people who are in the field and really doing the work, not just fire protection engineers who made the code 30 or 40 years ago.
And I'm guessing it's probably easier to have input before they change rather than try to undo them once they're done, right?
Right, exactly.
So we all probably need to take an active role in this, making this happen. I'm guessing.
I just wanted to jump in and point out that Kephart is working with Rob and his firm to develop kind of a list of ideas for improving communities for the immediate time and the future. And we will love to share that with you, but the idea is we're still in kind of gathering information time period, but we'd like to get that out to you pretty soon to get some reactions and to be helpful. So that might be one way for us to help you think about ways to improve your existing communities. So just wanted to put that out there and let you know that's coming.
Thank you, Len. And I did get to see a rough draft of it, and it's very good. So any other questions from Rob? Is there a question you'd want to ask the group or John?
I'm just wondering how we all are dealing with, in the skilled nursing environment, double occupancy rooms and or more, if those are still around. Looks like someone's raising their hand.
Neil Ann, let me see. We might need to get you unmuted. Oh, she might be saying goodbye.
Oh, I think she was saying goodbye. So anybody want to comment on that, on the question about, you know, how is it going with multiple elders living in a room, and how are you managing that? Does anybody want to jump in?
I'll say a word, because this is a particular sore point. I've had several friends stop eating and drinking and take their lives because they wouldn't live in a senior living room. And nobody talks about it. It goes on the death certificate as failure to thrive. The semi-private room, the idea of sharing a bathroom and a curtain with a stranger who may be a little off the wall, is one of the great abuses of the elderly that's been allowed to perpetuate in our society, and it ought to be ended, and ended immediately.
Thank you, Jack. I hope we see some changes in policy and funding, because we have a lot of old buildings that need to be redone, and it takes, everything comes down to money. So I hope we see some changes in that.
Yeah. I think it's possible. Jill, just, you know, on that note, you know, we saw a number of years ago that all of our skilled nursing buildings, which had never been sprinklered, we were required to sprinkler them, and we were given time. We were given whatever it was, 10 years, because we knew it was going to be a big lift. But it happened, you know, and at expense. But it forced some people to build new while others renovated. But I can see, you know, that push for, you know, it's time to go past the privates, and let's just go for all single occupancy rooms, and let's do that over the next 12 years. You know, let's strike a date and make it happen.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. The history is that hospitals moved to semi-private rooms as an improvement over wards. And then when the Medicare and Medicaid law went through in 1965, nursing homes were seen as an alternative to long-term hospitalization and long-term fine ward. So they thought, well, semi-private room, which was the norm then, would be a good standard. But even then, it still triggered a lot of suicides. So, and I think it's not irrational for somebody who's confined to such a room to take their life. I just don't think that's an irrational suicide.
I hope.
I have a question if we're still looking to hear from the architects.
Yeah.
So, and I know you're very clued on this, Jill, from video you made recently. It's this social distancing term that, my gosh, we hope it doesn't happen in our communities where we're trying to promote social connection. So I'm looking for the silver linings that are happening. What new ways are you seeing that residents are connecting with each other and with team members? And what is it that maybe we should build upon that we're seeing? I read, I guess it was a blog on the Eden page about a lady who inadvertently created a bird watching group within her community. So I'm wondering, what other things like that are we seeing how residents are connecting? How can we promote that?
Anybody want to jump in?
I don't want to dominate, but we residents started a daily Zoom gathering every day, 7 days a week at 3 o'clock. We come together and we get a bunch of people, and the group changes from day to day, but we continue to have conversation. It's not particularly supported by the provider. The provider organization isn't as comfortable with Zoom as the residents are. And this is common among independent living residents, that technology, they're more comfortable with technology than many providers are. That now it's different when you get into the skilled nursing area, but what we've had is our residents are helping the people in skilled nursing to get on, and we're particularly using the Alexa show with the drop-in feature, so that even those who are most cognitively impaired, and those are all resident initiatives which are taking place. So we do have a lot of things that the staff are doing, and they tend more toward arts and crafts. Our activities people handed out coloring books and crayons to us so we could fill in the coloring books. So there are things that are going on, but I think you make a good point that we overlook the initiative and the value that residents, particularly the independent living residents, can bring to the industry and are. And by the way, I think Jack York, I think you all know Jack York from IN2L. He does a fantastic job of involving residents.
It's a great point. Thank you, Jack. And we've talked about that before, is shifting that, the whole narrative right now is that if you're over a certain age, your whole role in society right now is to be protected. And you are the victims, and shifting that to, we've got an amazing amount of human capital and people that are looking for purpose. And so how do we support that? I think sometimes our organizational cultures kind of squash that down. So we only have 2 minutes left. There was a question from Mary about that she'd really love to hear more about design ideas for safe distancing outdoors, and how do you create that so it feels more natural. So there are John and Len and Rob all put their email addresses in the chat box. I would encourage, reach out. Let's keep these conversations going. We could also look at continuing this conversation next week. So if that is of interest to people, thumbs up if you want to do that. And we could start with this and then go on to other things. Does that sound good?
That's what I'm kind of seeing, Jill. I think
Okay.
we'll pick it up and see how much interest there is next week, and then we can move on if we need to. So.
Okay. Oh, thank you all so very much for being here. And thank you, Caphart and SWBR. And thank you for everybody for your input. This is such an interesting conversation. Really appreciate all of you and everything you are doing.
Yes.
Thank you, Jill.
We'll see you next Friday.
Take care.
Bye.
Oh, and check out People Magazine online because Jackie's organization got an article in the People's Magazine online this week. Yeah.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah, there's a big
Great.
write-up about all of us living on site. So just take a look at it. We're online and just hanging in there.
Oh, Jackie, that's awesome.
Yeah, we're really, really proud of our staff, and to be mentioned in People Magazine, that's a huge, I think that's a huge blessing for them and has motivated them. So just take a look at it and celebrate with us.
And
You got
Jackie, what did they say? They said you talked to them about whether they liked the title hero, the tag, you know, the label, and what did they say?
Yeah, so last week we had the conversation about heroes really not being an appropriate, you know, title for the workers, and we've had the conversation, I've had the conversation with my staff all week, and they said, no, we're not heroes, we're warriors. So that is how they are identifying themselves, is as warriors.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I wanted y'all to hear that because I thought that was awesome. So
Give them all our best, Jackie.
I will. I'll be here probably through June 12th on site with them. That's when the governor will lift our orders. So my 10-year-old will probably grow about 7 inches before then. So
Thank you.
oh my gosh. Take care, you guys. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.